By now, many of you have probably seen the infographic put out by Bloomberg's gun ban group over Thanksgiving. It asks people to talk about guns during the holidays and purports to dispel several myths. But as is the habit with this group, it's rife with misleading statements and false inferences. Let's take them one at a time. The first one reads, myth. More guns in more places makes us all safer. Fact. The NRA's vision of guns for anyone, anywhere, anytime actually puts us all at risk. This is a classic straw man argument. The NRA has never argued to have guns available to anyone, anywhere, at any time. But that aside, the gun ban group offers no data or facts to support their claim. That's because the larger data set supports the opposite claim, that more legally owned guns reduce crime. As most of you know, concealed carry permits and gun ownership has soared over the last 20 years, and during the same period, violent crime has been cut in half. The second one reads, myth. Having a gun at home makes women safer from domestic violence. Fact. Women are 5 times more likely to be murdered by an intimate partner when a gun is present. This uses a misplaced data set and some clever wording to make a false point. You see, the term intimate partner not only includes domestic violence, but also prostitutes and rapes, which account for many of the murders. Contrast this with the CDC NIJ study that the gun ban group often misquotes. Speaking about actual domestic violence, it stated that only a negligible number involved the use of firearms. Also note that they didn't say when a woman owns a gun or when a gun is kept in the home, but rather when a firearm is present. This is because in most instances, the firearm was brought to the scene by the perpetrator. If the woman had owned the gun, many of these instances may have turned out very different. The next one reads, myth. The only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is with a good guy with a gun. Fact. If this were true, then America would be the safest country in the developed world. Well, this might be true if the availability of guns was the only factor. In reality, there are a variety of social and economic factors that have a much larger effect on crime rates. They go on to say that people in the U.S. are 20 times more likely to be murdered with a gun than in other developed countries. This statement's very carefully crafted. First, you have to be very selective with the countries you include, discounting countries such as Russia, Mexico, Venezuela, or many others that are, by any standards, economically developed, but have much higher crime rates. You also have to include the term, with a gun. You see, in many other countries, guns are not the weapons of choice. In Britain, you are much more likely to be murdered with a knife than you are in the U.S. Myth. Hiding your guns is enough to keep them away from your kids. Well, I agree. That is a myth. And this is a rare case of the gun ban group actually saying something with merit. Personally, I take a multifaceted approach to keeping my kids safe. I teach them to respect firearms. I teach them gun safety and proper use of firearms. And when they're not in my direct control, my firearms are locked away. But the most important part of this formula is the education. The least you think the gun ban group is turning over a new leaf, the next one is the biggest lie of all. It reads, myth. Congress hasn't passed a background check law which proves that Americans don't support background checks on gun sales. Fact. Congress's failure only proves that too many lawmakers cater to the gun lobby instead of the American people. 92% of Americans, including 82% of gun owners, support background checks for all gun sales. There's so much misinformation here that it's hard to know where to start. First, Bloomberg's gun ban groups alone outspent the entire gun lobby more than 2-to-1 during the last 2 years. You see, the entire U.S. firearms industry generates about $6 billion in revenue each year. Now that sounds like a lot, but to put it into perspective, Bloomberg's company alone, Bloomberg LP, generates more than $1 billion more each year. Also, Bloomberg's own news magazine, Business Week, reported that the entire gun and ammunition industry donated $14.8 million over the last 6 years to the NRA. That's less than 12% of the NRA's total revenue, and a fraction of what Bloomberg has personally spent to ban guns over the last several years. The fact is, almost all the gun lobby's funds come not from the firearm and ammunition manufacturers, but from 6.5 million American citizens that belong to gun rights groups. On the other hand, most all the anti-gun lobby's funds come from Bloomberg and a handful of other elitist billionaires. Now to that 92% number. It originates from a 2013 Quinnipiac University poll. The poll did not ask, do you support expanding background checks? The poll did not ask, do you support the proposed legislation? Rather, the poll asked, do you support background checks for all gun sales? You see, many people are not aware that background checks are already required for all dealer gun sales. And this question preys on that confusion. When people were given that information and asked much more specific questions, such as in this April 2013 CNN poll, support for background checks as they stand was high, but support for expanding background checks was much, much lower. And more recent polls show that support for expanding background checks continues to decline as people get more educated on the issue. I agree that we should talk to our relatives about guns over the holidays, but there's no need to use this kind of misleading garbage. You see, the facts support gun rights.